In January of 2018, cinema's traditional dumping grounds, Den of Thieves, a sprawling LA-based crime thriller mixed with a heist film, hit theaters. It was an homage, some might say a rip-off, of Michael Mann's Heat. It was a mid-budget thriller that did surprisingly well at the global box office. So here we are, January 2025, almost 7 years to the day. Den of Thieves 2 Pantera drops. Is it worth the hype? Is it worth a trip to the theater? Let's find out right now on Gen X Movie Reviews. Alright, let's get into it. Obviously, we can't speak about Den of Thieves 2 without speaking a little on Den of Thieves 1. Den of Thieves 1 really sets up the story that Den of Thieves 2 continues. How was Den of Thieves 1? Well, in my estimation, it was actually a pretty kick-ass little heist film. Did a lot of things in an excellent way. The cast was phenomenal. And if we're talking about cast, we gotta talk about Gerard Butler. He absolutely steals this movie. You can almost smell him on the screen. He looks like he reeks of cigarettes and whiskey and beer and sweat and day-old donuts. The man moves through the film with a weight and a danger that is palpable and just a joy to behold. We can't talk about cast without mentioning LA itself. The director, Christian Gudicast, grew up in LA, went to school there, and he wrote and directed this film. It's so clear that he has an innate understanding of LA. LA lives and breathes in the first Den of Thieves. Den of Thieves opens just like a classic heist film. The first scene, we see the heist where they steal the armored car. In the second scene, we are introduced to the cops. And the movie really sort of seesaws back and forth like that. Gerard Butler and his team mixed with Pablo Schreiber and his team. I think the movie does an excellent job of balancing out the two, and we start to really get a sense of the crew. No characters feel wasted, they all feel like they have something to do in the story, and it builds to a climax, a really fun climax. That final heist really lives up to the hype. I don't want to say too much for those of you who haven't seen it, but that last heist kicks some ass. Now, this movie, we definitely feel it's mid-budget. It's, not a giant classic shootout. But for that mid-budget thriller, it acquits itself nicely. As to the unavoidable comparisons to Michael Mann's Heat, well, Michael Mann is in a class all by himself. But this movie, I feel like, tells a really incredible story well within that genre that makes it a really fun watch. Honestly, it's just a blast to watch. That is the first Den of Thieves. Let's jump into Den of Thieves 2. Well, right from the start, this movie starts rough. A heist movie really lives or dies on the heists in a heist movie. The first heist just doesn't really hold a candle to the first heist in the first movie. We get a bunch of action, but we never really get a great sense of place, and it just feels like something we've seen before. They just feel like pale imitations of what came before. Right after the first heist scene, we're reintroduced to Gerard Butler's character, Big Nick. And these two scenes don't see the same energy from Big Nick. We don't see that force of nature quality that he had in the first one. It kind of lets the movie down a little bit. Eventually, Big Nick gets the information he needs, and off we go to Europe, where we see O'Shea Jackson Jr.'s character, Donnie, casing the diamond scene. Now, this move to Europe is kind of cool and a great shakeup, a great way to lead off the sting of the first film. But I gotta say, Europe doesn't live the way that LA lives in that first film. I would imagine this is chalked up to Christian Gudicast's familiarity with LA and the way that he could make that breathe. But Europe just feels like a bit of a wash. The movie then follows Donnie, O'Shea Jackson Jr.'s character, with his exploits to figure out a way to rob the Diamond District. And this movie really does start out rough. We don't really feel an impetus. We don't really feel a drive or a movement forward. It's interesting, but not that thrilling. The movie has a lot of extraneous characters that don't really go anywhere, as opposed to the first one, where even the guys on the different crews felt like they mattered, felt like they had real impact in the story. These extraneous characters feel like they're only really there to move the story along. And they're well acted, but they don't feel like they're delivering anything great to the story. And that really brings me to one of the biggest problems of Den of Thieves 2. It has a real villain problem. The big bads that they set up, we never really see them do anything to justify their big badness. We get more of a tell, don't show situation where we're told that these guys are the worst and they're super badasses, but nothing really ever shows us in the film that these guys are a force to be reckoned with or that we should fear them. We never see them do anything to justify this reputation of theirs. Then Nick arrives, hunts down Donnie, and tells Donnie he's ready to turn to a life of crime. This is another part where the film sort of falls down. We get a couple throwaway lines and a couple little details about how Nick is broke and needs the money, but I really think the movie could have delved a little deeper in this. I think for Donnie just turns around and believes that Nick is ready to turn to a life of crime. It just didn't really work for me. A couple throwaway lines and a little bit of behavior does not tell the whole story. In the first half of this movie, Big Nick really feels like fish out of water, but not in a fun way to watch. I really think we could have found a way to make Big Nick truly a fish out of water in Europe, this bull in his china shop meeting elegance and old world sensibilities. But that's never really capitalized on here. I really think the movie dropped the ball here. I would have loved to seen a few more scenes in LA where we see the world is just grinding on him and he has no choice but to make a turn to this life of crime. O'Shea Jackson Jr.'s Donnie is fun to watch. He's got a great natural charisma and he plays this part well. I just don't feel like the writing was serving him as well in the first half of the movie. Now, once we put these two together, they're a lot of fun to watch. They're a little bit of an oil and water. Donnie being that smooth operator behind the scenes with Big Nick being that guy charging forward. But I still think they could have found more moments for these guys. There's one moment in the film where they literally are done with each other. They fight, that's it. And then in the very next scene, phone call happens, they're like, oh, sorry, and then they get back together. Just moments like these just feel like a loss because these two have crafted such fun characters and watching them together should be an utter blast. But we're missing that in the first half of this film. And finally, we gotta talk about the heist. Heist movies live and die on the heist. In Den of Thieves, we're let in step by step, but as it happens, we have a really firm understanding, a great sense of place, and a really great sense of time and what's going on and how is it happening. We get excited, we're riveted, we're on the edge of our seat in that original Den of Thieves. In Den of Thieves 2, when we get to the heist, it's okay. It really feels like a downgrade from the first movie. A lot of what happens in the heist in Den of Thieves 2 happens in hallways. We don't really have a strong sense of place. There's some thrilling moments and it's well directed and well shot, but it also feels really small. It feels like there are low-tech ways of beating the problem, something you would have seen on TV in the 80s. Feels like A-team solutions, something Hannibal or Face would have come up with. And that's really not where you want to go with the sequel. If anything, the sequel should be topping the first one, giving us more, taking it up a notch. I'm not saying it has to be crazy, this is a mid-budget thriller after all, but really we should be seeing something that's blowing our minds. Not a series of convoluted scenes happening in hallways, elevator shafts, and on screens. I will say that the movie does pick up about halfway through and starts ramping up. If the first film, Den of Thieves, was a 3.75 out of 5 stars for me, where does Den of Thieves 2 Pantera fall? This movie gets a 2.5 out of 5 rating because while the first half is sluggish and doesn't really work up to par of the first film, the second half starts to pick up and you really fall in love with Big Nick and Donnie. There's so much to like about them and their relationship, and I think the two actors' natural charisma really complements each other, with Big Nick and that bull in the china shop demeanor and Donnie's smooth operator persona. Now that might seem a little high as I just spent the last few minutes dumping all over this movie, but I will say that once we hit the second half, it takes off and it starts to be a lot more fun. The chemistry between Gerard Butler and O'Shea Jackson Jr. is genuinely a lot of fun to watch. I'm gonna go for a 2.5 because while this movie is not a slam dunk and is a little bit of a letdown, I want to see more between these two. Without giving too much away, I would really love to see Gerard Butler's Big Nick dive further into this life of crime. And I'd love to see O'Shea Jackson Jr.'s Donnie try to mitigate all the damage. And no surprise here, Den of Thieves 2 sets up yet another sequel. Of course they do. It's 2025. But I will say that I am excited to watch more adventures between Big Nick and Donnie. So is Den of Thieves worth rushing out to the theater to see? If I were you, I'd give this one a pass and wait to watch it on streaming. It just doesn't deliver the kind of thrills and chills that you want in a movie. And if you're gonna go spend that kind of cash to go see something in the theater, you're gonna want something with a little more pop. And here's hoping, fingers crossed, that we see a little more out of Donnie and Big Nick. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe, or don't. This has been Gen X Movie Reviews.